Well, the image of Queen Elizabeth is set to be removed from Australia's $5 note, but the late monarch won't be replaced by King Charles. Instead, the Reserve Bank will introduce a new design that honours the culture and history of the first Australians. The change is expected to take a number of years, with the RBA planning to consult with Indigenous Australians on what the new note will look like. For more, I'm joined by Craig Foster from the Australian Republic Movement and David Flint from Australians for Constitutional Monarchy. Morning to both of you.
Morning.
Craig, let's start with you. Why do you say this was a good decision by the RBA?
Oh, it was a wonderful decision. I think, yesterday millions of Australians like me felt a real deep sense of pride that we're finally starting to recognise, our 65,000 years of history. It acknowledges this path that we're walking with First Nations and placing the monarchy into its now historical context. It also acknowledges the fact that Australia is growing into our contemporary multicultural skin with deep love and respect for our First Nations and the 65,000 years of history. And this type of symbolism is very important to demonstrate to all of us, to every Australian, to our First Nations people, of course, and to the rest of the world, that this is who we are in 2023. I've got to say, I wanted the Deputy Chair of the ARM, Nova Peris, to be here this morning because it's appropriate for a First Nations person to be talking about this and the impact on our First Nations community and how they feel. Sadly, she couldn't make it this morning, so you have to do with me.
David, how do you feel about the King and the Queen, the late Queen, being snubbed?
Well, I think it's not really the monarchs being snubbed, it's the Australian people, because there's a process. Now, people are entitled to debate this issue. They're entitled to raise this, and I have no objection to that. That's democracy. That's all in order. But we have a process. We will become a republic first, and then we remove the king from the official positions. We've had a very long tradition that in the lowest denomination note, and banknotes, of course, becoming almost irrelevant.
Exactly.
But to take the king away from that is a deliberate snub. It's an indication to his supporters that he's going ahead with the republic. He knows full well he won't be going away because the polls are so bad that you wouldn't put up a referendum. They've got to really wait until they can persuade the people that they have a model and that they should go ahead with that, and that can be tested. But we haven't reached that point.
Is that the case, Craig? Do you not maybe have the support that you think you had?
Look, I think that's disrespectful of First Nations people, actually. We're sitting here today in a space where finally the RBA has made a really important groundbreaking decision that we're so proud of. The fact that we're now going to recognise First Nations, 65,000 years of history, their leaders and their part in this beautiful Australian story. We're talking about the RBA or other issues. It's simply not right. It's about time. And again, I go back to the fact that so many of us are feeling deeply proud of this because we've spent so many decades denying, we've spent so many decades not talking about First Nations, disregarding them, not seeing them, not having them represented. And in 2023, just last year, there was a moment when we saw our most representative multicultural federal parliament as well. And I think that's similar. Many of us are feeling liberated in that way. This is who we are today. And so First Nations leaders and culture should be represented everywhere in Australia. The $5 note is just the next start. The fact that, the King to be coronated on May 5th this year, and this is a really important moment for Australia to have this conversation, is being replaced by a First Nations leader and culture is a really important symbolic moment because it recognises who we are today and where we're headed. And if we're walking this path with First Nations, which we are, then these ties, these formal ties with the monarchy and this symbolism to, a new king who, let's face it, very few in Australia feel any connection or association with or emotional ties to, it's no longer reconcilable. In fact, it's indefensible.
Craig, David,
I can understand the mistake. I'm flattered.
Has Craig got a point, though? The Queen was so popular. Is this the beginning of the end for King Charles in this country?
Not in the slightest. putting the alternative as though you've got to have either the monarch or the indigenous people on the back noses, it's not really a fair comparison. Now, the very best speech given at the Constitutional Convention, the most moving speech, which attracted a standing ovation from Republicans and monarchists, was by Neville Bonner, the very first person elected to the federal parliament, the first Indigenous senator. He was a great supporter of the existing system. It's worth going back to hear his speech because it is an absolutely superb speech. He delivers it very well. It is not a question of having our constitutional system continue or acknowledging the Indigenous people. It's not that choice at all. In fact, from the very beginning, the Crown acknowledged the Indigenous people in the royal instructions to Governor Phillip. He was told to treat the Indigenous people properly, treat them as other British subjects.
Well, it sounds like the decision has been made and everyone will have their own opinion. Thank you very much for yours.
Pleasure.